Okay, so far we have a left and a right, but we do not have a top and bottom. We can go everywhere there. So we do have a Y range. If I collapse these ones I'm not using, we do have a Y range set, but it's not listening to that. So if we open up our player controller script, you'll see in the late update, which is where you put physics events, we have it from the last video with the X range. All we really need to do is copy this, go down, paste it, and now we're checking if the Y is greater than the Y range. Your new vector 2 should be not X range, it should be the Y range, and the X portion should just be whatever its current transform.position.x is. So if you go beyond, I just changed it wrong. Oh no, I didn't. I did it right. So if you go above the Y range, your X should be whatever its X is, leave that alone. And its Y range, or its Y position should be the upper limit of that. And if your Y goes less than negative Y, which is the bottom of the screen, your new vector 2 would be, let me copy this, paste this, but it should be negative Y. So you can either go above the positive, below the negative, and it will lock you there. Save it, come back, test it, click in the right box. There we go. So there's our very nice movement there. Looks pretty good. Great. So the next step is going to be spawning the pucks in random locations. And then we'll worry about when to spawn them. But let's just see if we can get them to spawn in a random location within this range. So the first thing I'm going to need is actually a puck. So if I'm going to go to game object, or assets, excuse me, create sprites, circle. And I'm going to call this puck1. And then I'm going to throw that into, throw that into the scene. And you can't see it, but there it is because its layer needs to be set to, there we go. I put it on the pickups layer and that seems to work pretty good. I don't really care for its color. So I'm going to, under materials, I made a new material which you can make by going to create material. I'll call this puck blue 2 and just set that color to something that you want, like this dark color here, and then you just throw it onto the puck, which it now has for some reason gone away again. Hey look, there it is. Interestingly, when you add the shader, if it puts it behind the background, even if you put the order and layer up or down, it doesn't seem to affect it. But if you change the rendering mode to like transparent, which all that means is it will listen to the alpha, which is what A is in the red, green, blue alpha. I mean, if you wanted, you could make it transparent. But if you just set it to 255, the full value, it's basically opaque, but for some reason the rendering mode matters. Anyways, so there's my puck. Very nice. I like its color. I like everything about it. I'm going to make a prefab. When you make prefabs, make a folder for it. Create, folder, same naming convention, capital. A prefab is basically a saved version of an item. So I'm going to take puck1 and drag it from my hierarchy into my prefabs folder. That creates a prefab. Notice the blue cube. That indicates that that object is in fact a prefab. In fact, look at my hierarchy. Gray, 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 blue. The blue means it's a prefab. What that allows me to do is drag puck1 in and make more of the exact same thing, and it will pick up the same properties as the rest. It's like a factory where you make Ford trucks, right? You have one master copy and then you just duplicate it a bunch of times. The reason you use prefabs is if I want all my pucks to change color, I could change the prefab and they'll all change. If I want to change all their scale or all their speeds, right? You can just change the prefab and they all change. That's why we use prefabs. They all listen to the prefab. So, now it's time to get our script to actually spawn these things. One mistake that I made, I'm going to delete this prefab temporarily. This puck here is off center. Like if I have it up here, you'll notice its position is this and this. If you spawn something, it's going to spawn it at, that's almost like its native center of the universe is now that. So generally what you want to do is reset the position to 0, 0. So it's perfectly in the middle and then make the prefab. That way when you bring it into the scene, so let me delete this out of the hierarchy. If I just drag a puck into the hierarchy, it spawns perfectly in the center of the world. And then we can set values from there. So it's generally a good idea to do that. So I have my prefab, puck 1. It's centered to 0, 0. Good to go. Now we have a puck to instantiate, but we don't know how to instantiate. So Unity instantiate, right? Get used to Googling and looking at the docs.unity3d.com. So Google it. Instantiate. So if we look down at the example code, it's basically instantiate, and then in parentheses, what do you want to instantiate and where do you want it to be and at what rotation? So I'm going to copy that line. Quaternion.identity literally means keep the same rotation as it was. Okay? So I went to object.instantiate in the documentation. I copied this line. And now, for right now, we don't really want it to instantiate every frame, but for testing, we're going to for now, and then we'll fix that. So I'm going to paste that line. You could ignore this line down here for now. And what do we want to instantiate? So the current code says, I don't know what prefab is. Well, that's okay. Because we have public game object enemy. Remember that? That's our puck. In fact, I might just change that to puck. Public game object puck, which means in Unity, we're going to tell it this is the puck game object. So what do we want to instantiate? Puck. Where do we want it? Well, if we look at the three parts here, we have instantiate. What do we want? If I look at the, if I hover over instantiate, it says, okay, what do you want, comma, where do you want it, comma, what rotation do you want it? Well, we're going to leave quaternion.identity because that's just going to grab its old rotation. All we really need to put in here is where do we want it. So for testing, let's do a new vector 2. New vector 2, and in parentheses, let's give it some values like 2, 3. I don't know. Something like that. We're just going to hard code it in there. It's not what you would do, but it's a nice way to figure out what it's going to do. So what this will do is every frame instantiate a puck here with this rotation. Save it. Let's go here. Let's play it. Uh-oh, something's going to go wrong. Yep, nothing happened. Why? Because when we go to our UFO, oops, I'm going to go out of play mode. Our UFO, look at our controller. It says puck, none, game object. It's saying, I don't have one. Give me a game object. Oh, so we take our prefab and we drop that in there and say, oh, that's what you should spawn right there. You got to tell it. Remember our variable was a public game object? Now let's hit play. And look at that. I'm going to pause it. Every single frame, it spawns a puck. Right? So there's one and there's one. They're all in the same place. So it's kind of hard to tell. But there's a lot of them. Yeah, we don't want that. But we do know it is spawning. And what we really want to do is, instead of saying always spawn at this position, where do we want it to spawn? Well, inside the area, right? So there's actually a function. We need to find an X that is random. We need to find a Y that is random, but within a certain range, right? Well, guess what? There's a function that does that. So I'm going to take this 2 and delete it. And instead, I'm going to put a little bit of code that will get a random number between a range, which is literally random dot range. And if I look at the little pop-up, it says, okay, float min, float max. Okay, so I put in a set of parentheses, and I say your minimum is, I'm going to say 3.0, comma, the max is going to be, let's say, 5.0 f. Oh, okay. So I replaced the x with random.range, so it'll get me a random x. But we also need a random y. So I'm literally going to copy that and replace this number 3, which is my y, on where to spawn it, and I'm going to paste in my random.range. So it looks like a lot of code, but all we really did was replace the x with a random range and replace my y with a random range. And now, if I save it, go back, test it, let's see what happens. Eek! It's working! It is in fact working. Our range is way off. But it does work. So really, our random X range, shouldn't it be basically what the UFO's Y range and X range is? So if we go look at those in Unity, UFO, I found that 3.4 works pretty good. So underneath my script, instead of just putting in, where'd I go? 3 to 5, the negative version of the range would be what? Negative. In fact, you could use the variable. You could say negative X range, and this would be X range, and the Y would be Y range. I'm sorry, negative Y range, and positive Y range. Because those are floats, right? Remember? Public float Y range, public float X range, and we established what they are. So why not instantiate within the random confines of those? Save it, test it, let's see what happens. Hey, looky there. They are only spawning within my range. Ta-da!